What's going on, coaches? Thanks for checking out my YouTube channel. This is actually the first video of my YouTube channel, and ironically enough, we are talking about a topic that not every coach really would like to start their YouTube channel off with. Most of the time, whenever coaches start their football YouTube channel, they're talking about schemes, whether that's offense, defense, program development, program building, even strength and conditioning development. But today, we're actually talking about growing off of an 0-8 season. So why am I starting here? It's pretty simple. Most coaches usually only highlight the wins. Most coaches usually only talk about the good times. They only post the photos of the trophies, whenever they're hoisted in the air. They only post, the videos and the photos whenever they have a weight room full of kids. But I want to start on a different note. I want to talk about growth. I want to talk about how this season really forced me to, self-evaluate myself as a coach. And I really want to talk about the lessons that really changed how I coach as well. And not only changed how I coach, but how I look at program development today. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room here. If I was to hop on here and really start talking scheme, whether it's offense or defense or whatever, I just know the first comment I would get is, yeah, but you were 0-8. But yeah, your first season in Cortland, you were 0-8. Why are you sitting here talking ball to me? Here's the thing, I want to start with this because I think this is very important. I think it's very important to highlight the hard times. I think it's very important to document the hard times because whenever you do that, you can look back whenever things get good and you could go, man, we came a long way. Man, we survived bottom. We survived the hard times. And, to be honest with you, Game one of the season, we were playing against a solid team from Syracuse. Not a lot of people thought we were going to hang with them. We went into the locker room down by 10. Down 10 points, feeling good. We're hanging with a team, everybody thought was just going to come into our building to start the year and just walk all over us, but we're hanging in there. Second half, things kind of fell apart, and we ended up losing the game, of course, hence the title, 0-8 season. But, after that first game, I was feeling good. I was feeling confident. We were going into game two feeling good, feeling confident, knowing, hey, we can hang with good ball teams. And then kickoff started for game two. Game two really got out of hands fast. It started falling apart very quickly. My quarterback threw 3 interceptions to start that game and then pulled himself. So I was playing probably 3.5 quarters with my second string and my third string quarterback. My third string quarterback ended up coming into the game during the fourth quarter, threw a beautiful 80-yard touchdown pass, and that was the highlight of the night for us. But game two really changed everything. Once that happened, and my quarterback pulled himself, momentum really started shifting. Guys started quitting on one another, and things really just started crumbling in place. And this kind of led to lesson number 1. Buy-in can't be assumed. We're always seeing these big college programs and some high school programs adopting the slogan, all in. What does all in mean, right? So all in means a lot of different things, but we can never assume that everybody's all in, and we cannot assume that buy-in is there. Buy-in, discipline, and effort, it really must be taught. And, as we know, you practice how you play, and playing hard doesn't always equal practicing right. Practice habits show up on Friday nights, like I just said, and honestly, my standards weren't clear enough early on. And looking back on this season, I could confidently say that. I thought I was going to come into Cortland, midsummer because I didn't get hired until the middle of summer. I thought I was going to come in middle of summer, and between middle of June and the start of camp in August, I thought, I was going to get buy-in from the kids. Why? Because I'm showing up to workouts. I'm doing the workouts with them. I'm creating all the fancy slogans and sayings. I'm hyping up the offense that I'm bringing in. I'm doing everything that I said I would do, in my interview. But it was clear early on that while I was doing all these things, I was not putting standards in place. And honestly, that goes to lesson 2. Standards matter more than comfort. I was really so focused on developing relationships because I was new to Cortland. I was new to New York. The only thing that people here in Cortland knew about me was I was married to my wife, whose maiden name carries some weight here. That's about it. Relationships matter, but standards matter more. And I was just so fixated on making sure the kids liked me. I was so fixated in making sure the relationship with me and the kids were good because I only had a short amount of time before camp started. So that was my fixation. But my fixation was not installing a list of standards. And that really opened my eyes. The last game of the season, whenever I had a player, tried to challenge me a little bit physical wise. He wasn't jogging off the field. His attitude wasn't great. So I told him to take his helmet off and sit down. And I was met with a simple, well, why don't you make me? That moment in time, I was like, wow. Okay, we really did not do a good job of setting standards this season. And honestly, I was tolerating behavior. And, I believe anytime you tolerate behavior throughout the season, you're starting to let kids, tiptoe the line. You're starting to allow kids to get away from standards. And whenever you don't really have strong standards set in place yet, they're then going to be running the circus, if you will. But the standard must be protected at all costs. That's one thing that I really learned this year. Whenever you come into a new program, if it's a rebuild or not, you have to set a set of standards and you have to live by them. You have to live and die by them. I don't want to go on to lesson 3 quite yet because I still want to talk about this. I think it's just one of those things where, I said I was just so fixated on building this relationship with the kids where I didn't have that standard set in place. And whenever you don't have standards set in place, you end up tolerating behavior, which then tears your program down. So lesson 3, simplicity wins. Another thing that I made a mistake on, I made the offense too complex. I came from the college world. And, I was going to bring this offense in where we were going to go, 11 personnel, then 12 personnel, then 21. Then we were going to go into a stack backfield. Then we were going to go into a go-go formation. And then we were going to go into overload left and overload right. And then we were going to sprinkle in the double wing and all this stuff. And, honestly, I think it, bogged the kids down early. And I know that for sure because, one thing that I really realized, and this is at every level, kids need to crawl, then walk, then run. Too many times I think us as coaches, in our heads, we see it as like, hey, this is simple. Why aren't you catching on? Hey, this is simple. Why aren't you going as fast as I want you to? Kids need to crawl, then walk, then run. And, I realized that early on within the season because, during camp, we were trying to do this complex offense where we had 10,000 different formations. And I finally said, you know what? We're moving to the double wing, and we're going to run the double wing. And in that game, in that first game, in game 1, we did a really good job of running the double wing. We scored off of it. We were, like I said, down by 10 at half. And, we were sprinkling in some doubles and trips and stuff like that, throughout the game as well. And, I started seeing, okay, kids are catching on a little bit. Let's open up the playbook more. Let's dive deeper into the playbook. And really, let's see what happens whenever we open up the playbook for game 2. And of course, we talked about game 2, how that fell apart, on us. And, from there, I was like, man, okay. We just need to stick with it. We just need to stick with this power spread concept and, it will work. It will work because we have I was so convinced we had the pieces for it. We had the quarterback with the big arm. We had the receiver that can run, a 4.5 40 and, can jump out of the gym during basketball season. We have the track kids, at second and third string receiver. We have all the pieces. But truth be told, I was trying to force players to fit a system that, they couldn't. Honestly, I don't think they could thrive in. And, it was a big mistake. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead. It was a big mistake of mine to really stay with that power spread concept. And I should have doubled down on the double wing, no pun intended there. But we'll talk about that here in this moment. Lesson 4 I learned during this season. Leadership must be clear. Everyone on staff must be on the same page. Mixed messages hurt kids. One thing that I think a lot of coaches try to do is, hey, I'm the OC, they're the DC, they're special teams. Whenever you're the head coach, it doesn't matter who your OC is. It doesn't matter who your DC is. It doesn't matter who your specs guy is. You have the final say. If you don't like something, you must speak up. And that's one thing that I believed hurt me was I was too hesitant to speak up because once again, I'm brand new to Cortland, brand new to the school, brand new to the community, brand new to, just the New York area in general. And I became so fixated with making, good connections, good relationships, having everybody like me, being a good boss, making it easy, for my assistants to work under me. But at the same time, that hurt me because of the mere fact I wasn't using my head coach card. I wasn't putting my foot down whenever I didn't like something. I wasn't putting my foot down whenever I think we should do something differently. And, going into our off season, I think I'm doing a lot better job with that, and I'm a lot more comfortable using my head coach's card, especially now that I have this first season under my belt. But I say all this because clear leadership always removes confusion. On top of that, I think another issue was we as coaches were speaking so many different languages. I was saying one thing a certain way. The running back coach was saying it a different way. The receiver coach was saying it another way. The guys up top were saying it a whole different way. Whenever you have different language going on within your program and you're not all speaking the same language, it hurts the program. But most and foremost, lesson 5, this is the big one. Accountability, it all starts with me. Now, of course, I brought up, the player that, challenged me physically. Of course, I brought up the quarterback who sat himself. But I will not sit here and blame this season on any of those kids. I will not sit here and blame the season on anyone but myself, because that is... and it's not a burden. That's a cross you carry, if you will, whenever you're the head coach. That is the weight, the baggage, whatever you want to call it, you carry as a head coach, because everything comes back to you. There's a reason why the media wants to talk to the head coach and not the special teams coordinator. There's a reason why if something goes wrong on defense, the media is going to ask the head coach and not the DC. Because everything starts with you. Truth be told, I do own the result. I own it every day. I wake up every morning and I remind myself, hey, you were 0-8 last year. You're at the bottom. You've hit bottom. Every, poll, every ranking has you at the bottom. You're here at the bottom. What are you going to do to get out, right? One thing I think I did was I waited too long to make changes. And, that was with the offense. That was with standards. That was with culture. That was with a lot of things. I waited too long to make changes. I waited until the ship was sinking to try to plug the holes. And, one thing I really regret is not staying with the double wing more, because, like we'll get to in 1 second, we switched back to the double wing and saw great success, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. I let the fear of numbers and injuries slow my decision down because we missed 2 games due to injuries. I want to say maybe game 4. It was game 4 or 5. I can't recall the second. It was against ITC. We had 6 concussions in one night. 6. And we had to miss the next 2 games. And, I let the fear of, not having enough kids get in the way with me holding standards, because, hey, we've already lost, we've already lost enough kids to have to forfeit 2 games. So what am I going to do if, I piss little Timmy off and now he decides he's not playing now? And now I don't have enough kids to, play this 7th game of the season, and everybody's finally back healthy. And now, I'm like being a hard A and holding the line and holding standards, and kids are quitting left and right because I now flipped the switch on them. I waited too long to make changes. It's like one of my favorite sayings: you can always go softer, but you can never go harder, right? You can always start. Standards, you can always start discipline hard, and you can always ease up, but you can never go the other way around. So I let the fear of numbers and injuries slow me down, whenever it comes to making decisions. I also realized that, growth requires a lot of humility. This season did humble me. This season did show me that I do have a little bit of the ego as a coach, and, it brought me down a level, actually a lot of levels. I came into Cortland thinking I was going to flip this program around in 1 year. I thought I was going to come in and dominate with this offense and do all kinds of cool things and great things and, have a winning season and all this stuff. And, I got humbled super fast, and, honestly, it was much needed for my coaching career. But, what was the turning point? Because, there's a turning point in every story. Like I just talked about, we did miss 2 games due to injuries. During that time, we really used, practice over that 2.5-week stretch to simplify the offense. We used it to go back to the wing tee, to double down on the fundamentals of the wing tee. And honestly, those last 2 games, they were more productive than ever for us within the season. I would argue they were more productive than the very first game of the season where, I was just talking about we were hanging with a really good team from Syracuse. We rushed for almost 300 yards, game 7 against Camden. And then game 8, our last game of the year, we went up 12-0 against our crosstown rival, Homer. They have a hell of a program. Had an amazing kickoff return from Aniko Abani, then scored 3 plays later, recovered an onside kick, scored again, went onside again, and just missed another recovery. So I'm telling you, if we recover that kick, we could have easily gone up 20-0 by the end of that first quarter. Unfortunately, due to the name of the video, of course, we lost that game eventually. But I think those last 2 games were our most productive, and I think that was a big turning point for us. But even though with that turning point, I was still battling with myself mentally. I doubted myself a lot. After the season, I questioned if Cortland got it wrong. There were some people in the building, whenever I got hired, that were saying, you hired the wrong guy. He just walked into the interview and was just, all hyped up and rah-rah and, just sold you a dream and whatever. And, honestly, I thought they were right. I thought about hanging it up and, calling some of my connections in the college coaching world and trying to get back into college football as an assistant and, kind of just cut my teeth more in the college world and, kind of just lay low as an assistant coach. But what kept me going was the kids, honestly, and I think that's what keeps us all going at the end of the day. And, it's really just making the kids feel capable. It's making the kids feel capable that, they have the potential of growing a great program. They have the potential of becoming something great because, mind you, Cortland hasn't had a winning season since 2010. I don't think we've been deep into the playoffs since the early 2000s. Cortland hasn't had a winning culture in a very long time. And I think, whenever we went up 12-0 against Homer, a lot of kids opened their eyes. A lot of kids realized, hey, we can hang. Hey, we can play with the hard teams. We can play with the tough teams. We can play with the crosstown rivals. And we haven't gone up 12-0, on Homer, in a very long time from what I'm told. So while there was a lot of battles throughout this season, and while there was a lot of low points towards the end, there was a lot of high points as well. But I was still having that mental battle with myself. And, the big lesson I learned is you're in this position for a reason. The tight end coach for Colorado, his video where he's introducing himself to the team is going around. And, he walks in very confidently and he goes, I know why I'm here. God sent me here. And, I don't mean to sound cliche and I don't mean to steal his sayings or thunder or words, but truth be told, I feel like God has put me in Cortland for a reason. God has put me in Cortland to help turn this community around. God has put me in Cortland to turn the program around. And, God's put me into Cortland to, really help young men, improve their lives as well. And, if you're a first-year head coach, just know, that first year might be brutal. And that's if you go into a rebuild or into, a program that's already established. That first year might be brutal, but keep going. Because, honestly, this season showed me I can handle the worst case. I remember whenever we had to forfeit game 5, and then we decided that we had to forfeit game 6 because of injuries. I was sitting there thinking, man, there's a possibility my first season as a head coach, I might be 0-8. There's a possibility my first season here in Cortland might be 0-8. I came in here with all of this energy, with all of this promise, with this 5-year plan, with this 10-year plan. I came in with all of these ideas, and here I am probably going 0-8 this year. And, the year showed me that I can handle it. The year showed me I can handle things whenever it's at its worst. And here's the thing about bottom. Here's the thing about being on the bottom. You can only go up. You can only work your way up, right? As always in football, we're talking about adversity. And, the adversity that I was met with this season, it really helped me grow not only as a coach, not only as a man, but, as a son of God as well. I really leaned on my faith a lot this season, talked to the big guy upstairs a lot this season, talked to my mom who's in heaven, this season, talked to my grandfather more than ever who's also in heaven this season. And, it really taught me a lot about myself as a person and, like I said, as a man of God as well. So what does year 2 look like? The year 2 vision, standards, will be set and enforced. We are currently in our off season right now. So we are definitely, setting that standard early and we're doubling down on it. And, this year I'm not going to let the fear of numbers dictate my decisions. I've already had this conversation with my coaching staff during our last staff meeting. The fear numbers will not dictate what we do in this program. The fear numbers will not dictate the actions we take. It will not dictate the standards that we set forward. If you can't be part of the standard, you could leave. If it's not about the program, it could be out. And, this is a big reason why we adopted Believe or Leave. A lot of coaches within the Twitter sphere, has seen me post the hashtag Believe or Leave. And I stole that from a speaker who went to Penn State to talk to James Franklin's crew. And he goes, "Coach, I love that I have this saying on the wall over here, but if you can add one more for me, I want it to say Believe or Leave. Because if you can't believe in yourself, if you can't believe in what this program is doing, there's the door." And it's simply going to be that this season in year 2. If you cannot believe in what we're building, if you cannot believe in the mindset we're putting forward towards this program, if you cannot believe in the standards we're putting towards this program, you can easily see the door. So, coaches, here's the deal. 0-8, 0-10, 0-6, 0 whatever season is hard. It teaches you a lot about yourself as a coach and about yourself as a man. And, I really think the best thing to ever happen to me was to go 0-8 because it really showed me that I'm built for this industry. It really showed me that, I have what it takes to go through the hard times. I have what it takes to be at the bottom. And, I'm excited because there's nowhere to go but up from here. There's nowhere to go but up. And, I'm excited for year 2. And, I'm going to make another video later on about, what we're doing in year 2 to right the ship, what we're doing in year 2 to really set the standard and to really show, what a Mike Barfield, Cortland Purple Tiger program is all about. So I'm super pumped for year 2. And I really hope you follow along with me. On the screen, you'll see my email, which is just coachmikebarfield@gmail.com. You'll also see my Twitter account, which is @_Coach Barfield. You'll also see my Instagram, which is @Coach Mike Barfield. If there's ever anything I could do for you, always reach out. I'm always open to talking ball, always open to, learning how to build programs and talk about building better programs. I have a strength and conditioning background, so if you ever need help with that, let me know. If you ever want to, like I said, talk ball, always hit me up. I'm here for you. If there's ever anything I could do for you, coaches, let's continue building programs. Let's continue building wonderful young men, and God bless.